feature and a short.
Welcome to Feature and a Short. This is Justin Joseph Hall. I'm your host, director, and editor at Fourwind Films and Chatelain. At the end of each season of Feature and a Short, we dole out our Fresh Air Award. What is the Fresh Air Award, might you ask? Well, it's the conversation you're about to hear. 4 cinephiles arguing for 5 movies from the assigned decade. When we are discussing, we won't be talking about the best movie from the decade per se, as so many other awards tend to discuss, but rather we're looking for the work of art that has most impacted movie making, truly discussing the most influential motion pictures of the decade. This podcast is called Feature and a Short, therefore nominations must include at least 1 feature and 1 short movie from each of our following 4 cinephiles lists. A feature is defined by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences as any movie over 40 minutes, and a short is any movie under 40 minutes in length. But other than that, if a piece contains moving images and came out in the decade, it is allowed to be considered for this award. This year we're discussing 20 nominations of films from the 1930s. Before we get into our nominees, let's gather some historic knowledge on what was going on in the world and the movie industry going into the 1930s. The 1930s may have been the most significant decade in modern history. It started off in the most globally known economic sinkhole known as the Great Depression and the largest war of all time. Both were downsides to the new industrial global market. Such societal upheaval had severe effects on all industries, including film. Despite the world economic hardship, some of the most profitable movies of all time were created in the 1930s. Motion pictures included synced and recorded sound. To aid recording and freeing up actors again, unidirectional microphones helped sound recordists record more specifically. Productions could record more than 1 track of audio and mix it later. Most countries like the French and the British did adopt sound as a standard, and they flourished. Then there were other countries like Japan who were slow to keep up with these new costs. They didn't need to, as their silent film industry continued strong throughout the Depression and the start of the war. The new sound techniques did not help everyone in the industry. Actors who couldn't adapt to the new expectations of recorded audio were left behind by fickle fans, and new well-spoken actors prospered, such as Joan Crawford, Greta Garbo, and Clark Gable. A few directors who came to the forefront in the 1930s include Yasujiro Ozu, Jean Renoir, and George Cukor. Color techniques were becoming more standard and potentially profitable in addition to sound. The new, famous 3-strip Technicolor process was first used by Disney in 1932. The 1930s also brought the golden age of Hollywood, marked by studio self-censorship in the form of the Hays Code, which was introduced in 1927, but not fully enforced until 1934. This decency standard would last for over 3 decades for the major Hollywood studios, which included the ban of homosexualism, profanity, god complexes, overt sexuality, and more. On average, more than half of all men, women, and children in the United States were going to the movies each week. Major studios were vertically integrated, operating together, owning distribution methods like theater chains and companies for international distribution. These oligopolies of the film industry, though, had to combat lower admission sales due to the Great Depression by selling food such as candy as attendees entered the theater. The double feature and the drive-in were new concepts that also helped sell more refreshments to keep profits up. Terms like Impressionism, Surrealism, and Expressionism seemed to be replaced by romance, war, and gangsters. Thank you, everybody, for listening to that history lesson. Let's now introduce each of our guests here. First off, Elizabeth Chatelain. Beth, can you say hi?
Hello.
Elizabeth Chatelain has directed documentary and narrative shorts, including My Sister Sarah, which won the International Documentary Association's Award for Best Student Documentary. Her films have screened across the world, including at Interfilm Berlin, Uppsala, and South by Southwest. Her directorial feature debut, Love Sets Maneuver, is currently in development and participated in the Women in Film / Sundance Financing Fellowship in 2022. Our second panelist, and you guys know him well from previous awards, he's a rapper, writer, and cinephile living the dream with his wonderful wife, Kara, and his cat, Thomas. He stays busy watching movies, collecting records, and making music with his friends under the name Spetched to Death.
Yeah, working on a new one right now, but... yeah.
So that's Kevin. Kevin, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Great to be back. Thank you.
And then John Robert Hammerer. He's been fascinated by films and filmmaking ever since wearing out a VHS tape of Fantasia under the influence of chickenpox. He has directed numerous short films, edited film, television, and web content. And he's worked as an assistant editor and dailies technician for clients such as HBO, A&E, and Netflix. When not at work, he can be found somewhere in New York City being weird. John, would you like to say hi?
I would like to say hi. I will take this moment to say hi. Hi.
And me, myself. My name is Justin Joseph Hall. I am an award-winning multilingual director, editor, and founder of Fourwind Films and Chatelain. My work has been acquired by major television networks such as HBO, and my work as a lead creative on projects has aided in receiving awards at the Emmys, Tribeca Film Festival, and many more. Thank you again to these great panelists for exploring the 1930s with me. You guys, I really have fun doing this and forcing myself to go to school again, and I'm glad that you guys are here to do the same with me. Let's begin with Kevin. What's your first 1930s film nominee for the film that pushed cinema forward the most?
I'm going to start with The Wizard of Oz, a film most people have seen. 1939, directed by mostly Victor Fleming, but also George Cukor and actually like 3 other dudes as well. There are a lot of dud films in the 30s. I don't know if you guys noticed that when you were kind of going through this. The shift from silent to sound was really rocky, and there are maybe more misses than hits during this transition period. But by and large, the films we now consider bona fide classics from the era are the movies that really brought music to the forefront. The Wizard of Oz is wall-to-wall banger songs. I haven't seen the movie since I was 10 years old, but I knew every single song, except for one, as soon as it started. Off to See the Wizard, Ding Dong the Witch is Dead, and of course, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is a song that was nearly cut from the film by the studio because they thought it might be degrading for star Judy Garland to sing in a barnyard. Music gets integrated into the core of a movie, whether it's a musical or not. On top of that, The Wizard of Oz is a funny, exciting, and visually opulent movie. When Dorothy steps into Oz for the first time and the movie suddenly flips from black and white to color, this is still one of the most dazzling moments in the history of cinema. Even now, when we see color all of the time, it just simply demands our attention as an audience. It's saying to us, okay, here we go. This is a movie. You are not going to believe what we have in store for you.
It is true. Color, when that came in, it cost so much more, and the Technicolor process at least made it feasible, but they still had to work out whether or not it was worth the cost. And I think The Wizard of Oz is one of the movies that really set in stone that obviously if you have the right story, that the color can be used to enhance the story. This is one of my nominations as well. The Wizard of Oz was a very Hollywood studio film. Like Kevin was saying, they switched directors a bunch of times. There was a lot of set safety issues, including makeup poisoning, asbestos on set. There was a sexual assault claims, and a lot more. There are some amazing directors that touched this film. Victor Fleming, obviously. King Vidor finished directing the film when Fleming went to Gone with the Wind. He did most of the black and white stuff at the beginning of the film, including the tornado and the Somewhere Over the Rainbow. They didn't make a profit until 10 years later, and once it aired on television in the 1950s, it was considered one of the most watched movies of all time.
You know, you mentioned that this is the earliest movie that everybody has seen. There is a very strong case to be made for that. Like, when I read that this was supposedly the most watched movie all time, I was just like, yeah, that makes sense. Stepping even further, what this movie does is it uses the industrial strength of the studio system and the glorious Technicolor to really create this alternate, tangible world.
Let's move on to our next. JR, do you want to have your first?
So I'm going to start with the first animated feature. That is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1937, the first feature film from Walt Disney, where you have the innovative nature right off the bat. The fact that this was the first time they took a cartoon and sustained it to feature length. But we could go so much deeper. After the silent era, which had, with the lack of sound, it had this rich potential for fantasy and metaphor and suggestiveness. Then with sound, things fell back to earth. With Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you really have what we think of when we think of fairy tales. That whole look, that sumptuousness and sense of magic. And it really created the template for the animated feature as we know it. Everything was either attempting to be it or a conscious reaction against it.
For sure. This was also one that I had to nominate as well. Into the theme of kids and movies that have a legacy globally, where so many people know it and it's part of their childhoods and how they've been brought up since the 1930s.
It's hard to say when exactly fledgling animation studio Disney became the huge Disney monolith that every person knows today, but probably this is the point to start looking. It was like a huge financial risk. Walt Disney mortgaged his house to get it done. They went into a ton of debt, but what he was trying to say is animation couldn't be restricted in any way, and that they could compete with the big boys, the studios. Obviously they did. The movie made so much money. It made $4.2 million. To put that in context, the average movie ticket was 25 cents. The icing on the cake was the merchandising, which amounted to $8 million in sales. There were Snow White hats, Snow White dolls, there was cups and glasses, and there were even garden seeds with Snow White prints on them that you could buy. At that point, Disney was thinking about, how can I turn this into a multi-platform success?
This was one of the first films that used rotoscoping for the animation, for the dance sequences. So they utilized live action to create the animation.
Let's move on to the next one, Beth.
M was from 1931, so this is towards the beginning of this era. Directed by Fritz Lang. The film's story was inspired by the career of a serial killer in Dusseldorf. It was written by Lang's wife, Thea von Harbou. And a little bit about Lang. He had the hit Metropolis in the 1920s. Joseph Goebbels offered him control of the nation's film industry if he would join the Nazi Party, but shortly after he fled Germany. This film comes from the tradition of Kammerspiel, which depicted the life of the lower class in a naturalistic way. M utilizes a type of stylized realism that is accentuated by its expressive use of sound, like whistling of the Peer Gynt suite by the murderer. This is Lang's first sound film, but there is no score. The montage at the top of the film is remarkable in its subtlety, a succession of shots that depict the death of a young child by what is missing. An empty room, an echoing voice, a ball that rolls into the frame, and a lost balloon caught in telephone lines. The Nazi Party was on the rise, and as Ebert noted, you see a hatred of Germany of the early 1930s that is visible and palpable. The characters are grotesque in their appearance and performances, both the police and the criminals, as well as the murderer. It conveys suspicion and paranoia, credited with forming two genres, the serial killer film and the police procedural. It also uses a lot of techniques and styles of film noir, which comes out of expressionism. It sort of melds it with a naturalism. What most stood out to me as far as pushing the medium forward was the way in which he uses sound almost as leitmotifs, as you'd see like in an opera, this whistling. There's no soundtrack, so everything is either silent or it's like these sort of natural sounds that are going on in the space.
To kind of piggyback off what you were just talking about with sound, one of the brilliant things about film as a medium that sets it apart from other arts is the ability to show one thing while suggesting another thing. When you hear a man whistling, you don't typically think of a looming danger, but this film gives us that. This uses the sound to complicate the friction of ideas that elevates the movie from entertainment to art. This movie is all friction. It's all contradiction. And within that space, he gives us room to not only empathize with the most horrible of men, but to like also question the very foundation of law and justice on which our society is resting in Fritz Lang's M.
Let's move over to one of my favorite, most admirable directors that we've talked about previously on the show, Luis Buñuel, with his documentary Land Without Bread. In the 1930s, you saw a rise of not just political works, but propagandic documentaries. Here in Land Without Bread, you have Luis Buñuel taking a surrealist approach to documentary, something that was supposed to be fact. But Land Without Bread was a parody of the documentaries of the time, specifically documentaries that people had been making about crossing the Sahara. But people can't help think of Nanook of the North, which we know was sort of a half documentary, half narrative. But they didn't let the audience know. Here, Buñuel stated, nothing is too serious and possibilities are endless. He really believed in the surrealist movement as a different way to see the world. Land Without Bread specifically teaches audiences to be aware. And he really does this with the voiceover. Originally, he would just talk along with the film as it was being shown, but eventually he hired an actor to record what he wanted for the voiceover. And so having a record of how the movie was being made is really part of the experience of watching this film. It pushes people into other mediums and other experiences because you're going to talk about it afterwards. Just as I would say Do the Right Thing might be known for doing, or No Country for Old Men. They make you talk about the experience of being in the cinema after you get out. This movie means a lot to me, and every time I see it, I get so excited about thinking about it once you get to in the middle of the film.
I had seen this movie before, maybe like 10 years ago, and actually I didn't know that it was not real. I think it could be argued to be one of Buñuel's most subversive movies in that regard, pulling the rug out from under expectations and under the audience to just kind of like shock the normies.
Part of just a general public, you really just took documentaries at face value. You didn't really think, oh, somebody is manipulating me or manipulating the circumstances. It's pretty incredible in its subversiveness.
For the second film, I'll discuss Duck Soup, a 1933 comedy film starring the Marx Brothers and directed by Leo McCarey. We've mentioned in this discussion how the coming of sound led to a displacement of the form. Some names fell, some names rose. The Marx Brothers, these vaudeville stars, basically they would be put in these deliberately formulaic plays, and they would deliberately demolish them through wit and sarcasm and humor and odd surrealist tangents. So they were signed to Paramount, and they made 5 films there, and Duck Soup was the culmination of that, because this movie is absolute anarchy. The plot involves Groucho Marx, he of the glasses and the grease paint mustache, becoming the leader of a small country called Fredonia, and taking that as his excuse to do whatever he wants. Meanwhile, Chico and Harpo are spies for another nation. Not the best spies, but they still fall in with Groucho anyway. And you have really this mixture of gags. They were fortunate in that they had worked with a bunch of previous directors in their other movies, like Norman Z. Leonard and Sam Wood, but this time they were paired with McCarey, another guy who had a very strong knack for improvisation. And so the movie feels like it can go anywhere at any moment, and it is startling to witness. So it's probably no surprise that this movie wasn't that big a hit when it first came out. It wasn't a bomb as is commonly reported, but it didn't do as much business as their previous flicks. They were let go by Paramount and they signed on to MGM, but this movie still makes me laugh hysterically and so many other people. It just feels appropriate to end an introduction to Marx Brothers on a silly note. The town of Fredonia, New York complained about their name being used for this movie, and the Marx Brothers' response was typical. Change the name of your town already. It's hurting our picture.
That's exactly right. The movie's about anarchy, but it's funny because the whole plot revolves around 2 monarchies. They are really just about comedy to make people laugh, but I think they're smart enough to put some meaning behind their work, which I think all great artists are. It's a farce, and I think you can't argue a farce on dictators in the 1930s is about as fitting as it gets.
Well, why don't we go to the other end of the era with The Rules of the Game? The Rules of the Game came out in 1939, directed by Jean Renoir. Jean Renoir was the son of the Impressionist painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir. He began his career in silent films, much like all the other directors here. He emerged from poetic realism cinema from France in the 1930s. The film Rules of the Game provoked a political riot at its Paris premiere and was cut and re-edited by its distributor from 113 to 80 minutes. It was banned by French military censors. Nazis continued to ban it through the occupation, and the Allied bombing destroyed the original negative in 1942. The film was reconstructed under Renoir's supervision in 1956, with only one original scene missing, thankfully. This film is concerned with the social breakdown and cultural decadence at a pivotal time for Europe. It shows how society has become a collective lie, and those who tell the truth or break the rules come to no good. The visual style takes Renoir's work to another level. His use of long takes and deep focus that he began to use in La Grande Illusion are mastered in the Rules of the Game. Sequence shots dominate almost every scene. The camera moves continuously. The only expressive montage we see is in the hunt scene. And then the hunt scene, which is the most visually beautiful, but is also one of the most gruesome and heartless scenes of the film. It's a powerful critique of society and the war.
This was a movie that was released and immediately had a very strong negative reaction from its intended audience. It takes the form of the Manor farce, where everyone's cheating on everybody with everybody, people are slamming doors as other people are coming in.
He really staged scenes well. He used the space of this giant place. He moved the camera in order to show that space and to show character development at the same time. A lot of the scenes are fun, even without the context of the movie. He really invented this sort of long take that was going away from the montage and towards a unique, separate cinematic experience.
The next film is the 1932 short animated film Flowers and Trees. This was a Disney movie directed by Burt Gillett. Think about all the innovations that Walt Disney brought to movies, and we've talked a lot about that with Snow White. Color usually isn't one of them, but Flowers and Trees is actually the first film to use the 3-strip color process we now commonly refer to as Technicolor. At the time, Technicolor co-founder Herbert Kalmus had approached Disney about incorporating the color process. And Disney was actually mostly focused at the time on trying to replicate the success of Steamboat Willie and Mickey Mouse by creating new star characters like Pluto and Goofy that could have their own series of shorts. But he went ahead and implemented color into this film, which was originally designed to be black and white. It was a huge success, largely due to the color, and it led to being the first animated film recognized by the Academy Awards in the new short subjects cartoon category. Also, the increase in interest in animation across the board. It laid the foundation for the transition into feature film. Disney was cunning enough at the time to lock in an exclusive contract with Technicolor for animated films. And so no other company was allowed to use the 3-strip Technicolor process. That freedom of the guaranteed success of color animation with audiences allowed him room when they went to do Snow White to push a feature film that didn't have the safety net of Mickey or Pluto or another one of their big stars. That became Snow White. Originally, when they were conceiving Snow White, they only referred to it as the feature symphony to see how that was a natural extension of the Silly Symphony shorts that they were doing.
The number one thing to mention in addition is this film paved the path for a bunch of other films that we're talking about in this podcast. It obviously paved the film for Snow White, which had color, Wizard of Oz, who used the same Technicolor, and it showed that it was worth doing this investment of putting color into your film because audiences loved it. So from Flowers and Trees, you get Three Little Pigs, you get Wizard of Oz, you get all of these Technicolor shorts, which I think most people remember Technicolor from the 70s, from 70s musicals, and the legacy of Technicolor is one of the longest lasting in film for a simple technical process that just added another dimension, just like sound was added.
And this would be the standard color process until Eastman Color in the 50s took over.
I'll bring forward another nomination here. This is a film that I don't think any of the other panelists had heard of before I nominated it here. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Totally surprising.
So this is Lampião, o Rei do Cangaço. I speak Portuguese, but not greatly, so we'll just refer to it as Lampião. And the reason why I think this film pushed cinema forward the most is this is a documentation of a very, very famous outlaw in Brazil. First off, we should say it is a silent documentary on Captain Virgulino Ferreira da Silva, who was born a cowboy and became a king of the poor bandits in northern Brazil. He was the most successful bandit leader and known in Brazil. Poor people at the time in the 1930s were treated very poorly by the police, which is a reason why he rose to fame, similar to bank robbers in the United States like Bonnie and Clyde, Babyface Nelson, who became popular, violent thieves during the Great Depression. Lampião also traveled and robbed with his wife, who was one of his bandits, and he had a child with her. So there's love story in what was captured. Lampião is a word that means lamp in Portuguese, and the reason why he has that name is because at night when he was firing the gun rapidly, it seemed like he was holding a lamp in his hand. He was born into a family feud, like the Hatfield and McCoys in the United States, and his family had moved to get away from the violence, but there's a police confrontation in which his dad was killed, and so he went to get revenge, and he did it violently. He became an outlaw and was pursued by the police for the rest of his life after that. And get this, his wardrobe was wearing leather, riding horses, being armed. He had up to like 100 bandits behind him, robbing the countryside. And here we sit, going with these bandits, and we have footage being with them in the jungle. And that's how we're carried through in this very short film. Can you imagine how much that would be worth if we had Butch Cassidy footage, or if we rode along with Bonnie and Clyde on their adventures? That's exactly what happened here. And the footage was taken by a Lebanese filmmaker living in Brazil. His name is Benjamin Rahal Botu. And just a few years before his death, when Lampião was almost at the height of his power, he won the favor of Lampião by letting him take the camera and film himself first. Then Benjamin Botu, he filmed him and wrote to local newspapers while accounting what was going on and what he was seeing. In 1937, the police confiscated all of the footage. We don't know who killed him, but he was murdered at the time. He had dissenting political opinions, and this footage was lost until 1957 when they discovered it. The part that you saw in the film online is what they could restore. So Lampião represented anarchy, individualism, and the spirit of the Wild West, or in the case of Brazil here, the Wild North. And it demonstrates the power of cinema to document and to capture even the most underground notorious criminals. And just think of what power it is to have that kind of footage, to be in their home, to be with them in their travels, and to see what they are like in the regular habitat. This proves some things about the legend of him and what he was like. We get to see him on screen and captured in that way.
Yeah, it certainly brings to mind some of the questions about what filmmaking can do as a tool and its ability to be sort of powerful for people, like an egalitarian tool.
This is why people, fight to have like their own perspectives told through their own perspective, what you put out, into the world and how it affects people who witness it.
The next film that I nominated is called Sisters of the Gion. It's directed by Mizoguchi from 1936. Mizoguchi believed this to be one of his first lasting achievements in cinema. He had made many short films ahead of that, but this was one of his big accomplishments along with the Osaka Elegy. He wanted to show the hardship of the lives of geisha in Gion. This is an area of Kyoto, a place that was usually synonymous with pleasure. But he also wanted to show something that was outside of Tokyo, and Tokyo is considered the center of Japan. Geisha were rarely portrayed in films before this time. The film serves as a critique of Depression-era Japan and its prevailing male-dominated social structure in a culture that was ramping up its war machine en route to a devastating campaign of imperial aggression and foreign expansionism. It was challenging many long-standing traditions and presumptions about what constituted acceptable relationships between prosperous businessmen who fueled the military-based economy and the vulnerable, financially dependent women who worked within the geisha pleasure houses in most of Japan's major cities. There's a beautiful use of long takes and framing within the Japanese homes. There's a really original way that he uses space and framing within these domestic places to expand and contract the space. Had a lot of influence on Japanese cinema afterwards.
I think one of the things that's so impressive about Sisters of the Gion is how short it is. It's not even 70 minutes. Sisters feels like there's so much in it. It feels like a 2-hour film in a good way. The economy of the editing is so impressive. Like, Mitsuguchi never is lingering on anything. It's like a scene will end and then another scene will immediately begin with new dialogue and new ideas, constantly propelling the story forward.
Which is how I feel like Hollywood tells stories nowadays. You're constantly moving the plot forward, and if you're not, that's the first thing that executive producers from studios might take out, because it's just a compelling way to tell a story, to continually pull you in further and drive you further into whatever the characters are going through at that moment.
The next one is Freaks from 1932, directed by Todd Browning. And the movie is about a troupe of circus performers, more specifically the Freak Show. For most of the movie, this plot isn't the first order of business. We're really going around this carnival and we're meeting the different freaks. Every time I'm using this here, it's in quote unquote, for the record. The Freak Show tradition, it's really interesting because on the one hand, it's effectively people paying to gawk at people with different bodies and different shapes and different ways. And yet at the same time, in this era, a lot of people with disabilities being in these freak shows was how they took control of their lives. Normal people in this movie, once again, I'm using the quote unquote, they're clearly the villains here. They're doing some pretty dodgy stuff and taking advantage of people who, like, otherwise in another movie would be treated as the villain. It's a lot for 1932, and when it came out, it famously got pulled, and 30 minutes were torn out, never to be seen again. Then it disappeared before it was discovered by, like, the counterculture in the 60s. This is, for me personally, a case of the shock of the new, because in the way that it takes these different bodied people and gives them their full lives, that's something we're still trying to catch up with.
I love the idea that you might be someone who would go to see a horror movie and then really get a subversive examination of empathy. My last film is King Kong, and it is from 1933, directed by Miriam Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack. I love King Kong. When I was a kid at video stores, I was obsessed with the box art of horror movies. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, all of those sequels that were coming out at the time. I wanted to rent them all, but I was not allowed to rent any of those movies. My parents allowed me to rent King Kong. When people talk about the significance of King Kong, why it's influential, or maybe like why it pushes cinema forward, they might talk about things like Willis O'Brien's iconic stop motion sequences, which combines rear projection, models, matte paintings, and foreground sets in one sequence. Also, there's a revolutionary score by Max Steiner, which was the first for an American sound film. But that's actually not why people love King Kong. People love King Kong because director Miriam C. Cooper was a bona fide showman, sort of a circus performer in a way, or like a ringmaster, I guess they're called. And he understood that what moviegoers really want was to feel like they were seeing something they'd never seen before, something they could only see in a movie on the big screen, something impossible. And so this is the blockbuster template that is still being used today, and I feel like it connects deeply to people's sense of wonder.
Obviously, the most famous thing are the special effects, the stop motion that they used here, and it revolutionized special effects in the way it was done in the future. Not only the special effects, but also the sound effects. Again, the newest thing in cinema was sound. They did quite a bit of work making these animals real with sound design, and that includes recording captive vocals of captive lions and tigers, playing it backwards, creating Kongs love grunts.
Kongs love grunts.
Kongs love grunts.
But anyway, it just brings out really the reality and, in this case, the personality of King Kong.
So my next one is The Color Box. It's directed by Len Lai. In mid-1935, Lai made a deal with John Grierson, who some of you may know as a famous documentarian, to make a direct animation for the GPO film unit, which is basically the British post office. Lai was paid £30 with his materials paid for by the GPO. It took him 5 days to finish. Lai and sound editor Jack Elliott went through hundreds of recordings looking for music to use as a soundtrack, which is a big part of the short film, and then they selected the Belle Creole. After the music was transferred to film, Lai made cue marks on the soundtrack, which he used as a guide as he painted on the image track. Lai painted long, continuous patterns on 35 millimeter without frame lines to separate individual film frames and with few splices. He used combs or sticks to create linear patterns on the film stock. So A Color Box was first known to critics and journalists. In 1935, in September, cinema owners were hesitant to screen the work because of its experimental approach and promotional nature. The Granada Theatre and the Tatler Cinema were among the first to screen it. The Canadian animator Norman McLaren was probably one of the most well-known for this direct animation, carefully studied the film and was inspired by Lai's technical inventiveness. So I chose this because it's a really early example of direct animation, which would later be used by Stan Brakhage. Stan Brakhage is probably the other very well-known filmmaker to use this method. So I wanted to bring it in because I feel like most of the films that we're talking about are pretty mainstream, and this is something that where film as an art form was being pushed forward in using this direct animation by painting directly onto the cells of the film and then projecting it.
The short film that I put into the pool is Porky in Wackyland from 1938, a Looney Tunes cartoon directed by Bob Clampett. Porky goes to Africa to catch a dodo bird. That's really the extent of the plot. This is a cartoon that's basically about the gags. And we've talked a lot about the development of animation. In the 30s, we saw that move to realism, but this basically, it's the resurgence of that surreal style. There's no pretense towards naturalism in any way. It adds this certain kind of deranged intensity, this convulsive quality. Like, this never lets up. This is manic and intense and over the top. And the dodo bird messes with Porky because that's Porky's job. He's there to take the fall for the comedy. And even outside of Warner Brothers, Tex Avery would take this baton in his MGM shorts. And this, and Clampett's work in general, would move on into TV animation. Like Ren and Stimpy would be unimaginable without his work. But this is where it all began.
Let's jump to Gone with the Wind. Obviously, there are connotations, not just connotations. You see racism in Gone with the Wind directly because of who is presenting the film and the time that it's representing and who our protagonist is. We're following a rich, young, white Southern lady during conflict, something that normally the upper class people can leave behind. But in the Civil War, that wasn't the case. They're right in the middle of the war. It's happening around them. It's just a very unique film that is controversial and, as we'll talk about, incredibly influential in cinema and how we consider the business of cinema, because Gone with the Wind is the most profitable film of all time. Still today, when adjusted for inflation, it made more money than, yes, this year's Barbie, more money than Titanic, and even more money than Avatar. It is at the height of the golden period of Hollywood, and it is at the culmination of having sound for the first full decade. This is coming out in 1939. Being able to tell long epics and using color to do that. It's protested even today. Black audiences were concerned back when it was made as well. It doesn't really acknowledge slaves. It kind of just puts them in the background as mise en scène almost almost as they're not people, and they're very stereotypical depictions of them. And I think it's important to start talking about this, because if you don't talk about it up front, it's hard to talk about anything else.
Gone with the Wind is a racist film, full stop. I also think that it is a great film. And acknowledging the difficulty of putting those two ideas together is, I don't know, part of the fascinating thing about encountering art from long ago. It's also, like, on a lot of levels, a great story, but also has this other element to it which cannot be ignored. The best way to view it is to be constantly re-examining how you're watching it and what sort of things you're paying attention to.
There were multiple directors on this film as well. This, just like The Wizard of Oz, was heavily produced by the studios.
It sort of reminds me of something like Streetcar Named Desire or other Tennessee Williams films, where it's really about the decline of the South, the dismantling of this idea of the debutante, of the upper class Southern belle, and that whole lifestyle and the idea of what's a gentleman and what's a lady. It's really dismantling all of that. We can see that those who survive are the people that let go of that idea, instead do what they can to survive. And I will say a couple of really, I guess, positive things to this film. The character of Scarlett, she's so unlikable in some ways, and yet she's so complex. She clearly wants one thing, works against herself. She's constantly manipulating other people and like thinking she's getting away with things, and then she drinks on the side. She's someone that you're like, oh, I really don't like that person, but in the end, her fortitude in the face of all of this.
And Vivian Leigh is so good. As you think of a role like this almost being like Tony Soprano from The Sopranos, being that unlikable thing and having that conflict within yourself through a character that you get to know really well. There are not a lot of lead female roles like that, and we have proof that it sells here. So it's interesting the parts that Hollywood seemed to take in the future from making so much money from it.
It Happened One Night from 1934, directed by Frank Capra. This is a pre-code romantic comedy. The screenplay was by Robert Riskin, and it's based on the August 1933 short story Night Bus by Samuel Hopkins Adams. So it's one of the first of only 3 films to win all 5 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Casting was a long process. Many turned down the role of Elle because of the script. It took convincing of Colbert, who plays the lady role, because of a previous film that she had done with Capra called For the Love of Mike. That was a complete flop. And there was a lot of tension in between the two of them, but she dictated certain terms. So there was a tense atmosphere at first, as Gable and Colbert were very dissatisfied with the quality of the script. So then Capra let Riskin rewrite it. Columbia appeared to have low expectations for the film and did not mount much of an advertising campaign for it. It had positive reviews, but the film was only modestly successful in its initial release. After that, when it was released in secondary movie houses, ticket sales grew exponentially, especially in smaller towns where the film's characters and the simple romance struck a chord with moviegoers who were not surrounded by luxury. So Ebert said that this is one of the easiest films to love and one of the hardest to think of as a work of art. It's the touchstone for romantic comedies to come. It started the template for the modern genre. It's a film that has been parodied and referenced often, particularly the hitchhiking scene and the Walls of Jericho. I mainly chose this because I felt like it was one of the precursors to a lot of our romantic comedies.
Well, that'll wrap up our 5 nominations from each guest, with a few overlapping. One of the most memorable films of all time, The Wizard of Oz, the first feature animation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the masterful transition to sound by Fritz Lang, M, Luis Buñuel's surrealist documentary, Land Without Bread, the 1930s political farce, Duck Soup, the French war commentary, Rules of the Game, which used staging in a brand new way, the first Technicolor film, Flowers and Trees, the document of an outlaw bandit running away in the woods, Lampião, o rei do Cangaço. The Japanese female leading role focused on geishas, sisters of Gion. Freaks, the story of circus entertainers, focusing on a community of people with bodies with abnormalities. One of the first giant monster flicks, King Kong, for its use of special effects. The experimental animation brought to you by the British Post Office. The surreal animation, Porky and Wackyland. The most grossing film of all time, Gone with the Wind. And the template for romantic comedy, It Happened One Night. Now it's time to vote. We'll be right back with the results of the voting. But in the meantime, you guys listen to this song by Backyard Wrestling. Backyard Wrestling is part of, as you heard last year, Magnum Opus. They are the undisputed world heavyweight champions of suplex rock, coming straight out of the backyard with championship riffs and no holds barred mayhem. And this is The Beat Goes On.
I'm not one of the cool kids. Pitchfork ain't gonna review this. And that's okay, cause I don't want him to anyway. No one's gonna tell me how to feel. I just wanna drive around with the stereo up and the windows down, cruising to the sound of my favorite songs, and the beat goes on.
Welcome back to the show. If you like that, Backyard Wrestling are preparing to release their first full-length album, Jorts, a collection of nostalgic, catch-as-catch-can power pop anthems that will command you to slice the pant legs off your finest pair of dungarees and jump into the fray. Now, for the voting results. The first one in my nominations of the 5, The Wizard of Oz came out on top and is moving on to the next round. JR's nomination that'll move on is Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Elizabeth Chatelain's nomination that'll move on is Fritz Lang's M. And finally, the one to move on for Kevin after Snow White and the Wizard of Oz were already taken is his childhood favorite, King Kong. So those are our 4 final movies. Let's have everybody just go through and defend one of these 4. We have a lot of overlapping movies, so feel free to talk about whatever film defended. These are your final arguments for which film should win the Fresh Air Award. Beth, do you want to start out?
So the film is M by Fritz Lang, 1931. It was at the beginning of the transition into the sound period, and its use of sound and visuals and the combination of those pushed the medium forward, as well as utilizing a combination of the visual style and the sound to create a compelling film.
The movie that I nominated that has advanced to the final round is Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, the first cel-animated feature film. It standardized a form. It defined a genre. It's this complete package of comedy and music and, romance and horror. It set a template that people have followed for decades. And it allowed Disney to become an industry player who has had enough power and riches to cryogenically freeze himself. So that is my argument for Snow White.
That's good. I'll just say, I think that all these films are very influential, especially The Wizard of Oz being almost the American Hollywood film that you think of when you think of Hollywood. That means something. Being the first feature animation film that launched Disney, that means something. Having color for the first time in these things, making the transition from black and white to color with The Wizard of Oz. But on top of that, you also pushed forward special effects so much with King Kong, and with M, you're really using like we talked about in last year's award, using all of the things that we know about cinema to put it together to make a really great movie of the time. I think they're all interesting arguments. I really, really think color and sound and that combination, the 1930s really speaks to that, and there's specific movies that I think speak to that a lot more than the two black and white movies.
The Wizard of Oz might be what you think of when you think of the quintessential Hollywood movie, but King Kong is definitely the movie you think about when you think about monkey movies. It is a great blockbuster genre film. It's a cinema as spectacle. It's dumb. It's just like, but in a good way.
Yeah.
You know, when you go to see like a big dumb movie, it's like a Fast and the Furious or just like a big destruction movie. It just allows you to lose yourself in the fantasy of it. And it's another film like Snow White whose template has been reused countless times for years and years to come.
And sequels upon sequels.
Sequels in love grunts upon love grunts.
Let's vote again. Right now you can listen to the jam band from Minneapolis, Chatelain. Enjoy.
Hey, this is Dakota from Chatelain, and the song you are about to hear is As the Stars Turn. It is our newly released single. Please check us out if you like the song on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, Bandcamp, or wherever you get your music.
Here we go, everyone. Everyone is excited to hear the next Fresh Air Award. The Wizard of Oz, the children's fantasy story. M, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first animated fiction feature film. And King Kong, the original huge monster special effects movie. In last place was King Kong. And in third place, we have M. And the winner of the Fresh Air Award for the 1930s is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Building Disney's empire, making animations longer, making them colorful, and using sound to the fullest extent in the 1930s. That is all. I am your host, Justin Joseph Hall. Thank you to our editor, Billy Joe Leightonen. Thank you to our sound mixer, Hans Bilger. The theme song for this season was New Tires by Silent Partners, what you're hearing right now. I just want to say thank you again to all of our panelists. If you guys want to quickly promote something, we appreciate how much effort you guys put into this.
This year is my second year being the director of programming at the Minnesota Film Festival in Duluth, which happens from April 3rd to the 7th this year. If you happen to be in Minnesota, we'd love for you to come. I myself am also working on a feature narrative that I've written and will be directing.
Very exciting. First feature film for Beth.
I am currently developing 2 shorts. The plan is to get one of them in the can this year. You can find all my shorts on my own personal website, jarhammer.com.
I don't have any projects currently in the mix, but onward and upward and just kind of trying to be creative and stay making music.
And for us, in the forecast to look forward to, you can go onto YouTube and subscribe to our channel, Fourwind Films. We have been releasing a bunch of older content that we had kept from YouTube for a while, including this podcast, which has just been released entirely on YouTube. And we're going to release more award-winning content of ours on the channel right now. So go to the website, click subscribe at FOURWINDFILMS. That's at Fourwind Films on YouTube. This is the last episode of Fourwind Films Season 7 of Feature and a Short. We will have another Fresh Air Award at the end of next season and choose the winner of the Fresh Air Award for the 1940s. If you like our content, we have much, much more and be the first to learn about it by signing up for our newsletter, which you can find at our website at fourwindfilms.com. I'm signing off to season 7 of Feature in a Short. I will talk at you soon. Peace.